Coming up, the NBA schedule was officially revealed, and the Brooklyn Nets, as expected, will have a tough road ahead. We take a look at some of the key dates in the first 20 to 25 games that could get them close to the top of that lottery in a hurry. Plus, one Dennis Schroder. Could he be destined to be the veteran that remains in Brooklyn as the youth movement grows? We dive into it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Adam Armbrecht. There is no Doug Norrie tonight, but we, of course, thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms and giving you another live YouTube edition of the podcast this week and letting you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms, they do apply. And, of course, as we said at the top, we have the schedule comes out for the NBA. We have this other element that I've been kind of looking at ever since we discussed Cam Thomas earlier in the week, the backcourt, and a theme about this team, the point guard role. What is this roster going to look like, even if they do spike when it comes to next year's draft class and get that number one pick, presumably, at least at the moment, being Cooper Flagg. So we're going to walk through a few stats around Schroder and look at why he, maybe unlike some of the other veterans still currently on this roster, makes more sense. But before we get to that, talking about that schedule release, obviously for the Brooklyn Nets, and listen, at a high level, as we said, when you have a 19.5 over-under win total being set over by our friends at FanDuel, when you are expected to be a team that wants to lose a lot of games, it's going to be willing to play a lot of young players. It's not like when the schedule comes out, there's anything other to really be concerned with than the idea that most games on paper you're going to lose. But at least as it currently stands, when you have these veterans on the team still, like Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Dennis Schroder, you at least have to feel like maybe from a game-to-game, early season game-to-game standpoint, they could certainly be competitive in some of these early on. But beyond any of that is after starting this this season on the road in Atlanta, in Orlando. We know what those two teams are kind of right now. Some decisions from Atlanta and who they were going to stick with, going to go ahead and keep Trae Young, at least for the short term. You have Orlando. They want to make their push into that upper category of the Eastern Conference. But if you're going to have a home opener in a season where you are ready to rebuild and ready to go with youth, man, is it unfortunate that it's the Milwaukee Bucks and then your very next home game is the Denver Nuggets. Like, hey, welcome back to Barclays Center. Let's have a good time. Opening night t-shirt is going to be available for you there as well. But you're going to take on the Milwaukee Bucks, a team that, listen, we don't know if they're still going to be the way they once were as they've gotten older and they've had to make some difficult decisions. But health played a big factor a year ago. Denver Nuggets, okay, they fizzled. They did not get across the line in the playoffs this past season, but we know how good they are. We just watched Nikola Jokic, right, in the Olympics. So, as well as with Team Canada, by the way, you had Jamal Murray underneath Jordi Fernandez getting some reps there internationally as well. But it is unfortunate to have to open up the Barclays Center on a new season, even if we all understand, even if we're all complicit in what the goal is here for the upcoming season. Doesn't mean you wouldn't hate getting some good vibes early on. So they have that difficult start there. And then overall in the first 25 games, arbitrarily picking that number, you can go with 20 because it basically marks the quarter point of the year. If you go through it, again, they're going to look like underdogs and be underdogs in almost every game that they walk into. But if you walk it out just to the 20th game of the year, which is a a back-to-back against the Orlando Magic at home, well, you're sitting there and looking at seeing not only the Milwaukee Bucks, not only the Denver Nuggets, you'll see the Phoenix Suns, you'll see whatever the Golden State Warriors are going to ultimately be. Maybe not high-level competitive in the West anymore, still a really good team. Still have a guy that helped the U.S. win gold in Steph Curry. The Kings are going to be there. The 76ers are going to be there. And oh, by the way, mixed inside of here early in the year, you're going to get that first look at Mikal Bridges in a Knicks uniform, 2 games away at the Garden, and that comes early in the season on the 15th and 17th of November. Like, you're only going to be a month into the year, and you'll finally get that taste. And depending on where things are going for the Knicks at that point, and for Mikal Bridges individually, Will we care if he has an amazing game against the Brooklyn Nets at home? On the podcast, no. But I understand the way the fan base feels about these things. And even if he's going to go on to have an excellent career, you'd love it if you just found a way to not have him look so good in those two games. But you'll get a double dose of that. No, by the way, the Boston Celtics will lead them into that journey, a home game before they go to MSG. And you're going to get the Celtics another time on the road early in the season. You're going to get the Cavs early here. So you look over all these games, and I went to 25, but even if you went to 20, I think I ended up saying, like, yeah, they could easily be a 5-20 type team 25 games in. And does that, in the grand scheme of things, if they're going roughly kind of 5-15 for every 20 games, you'll turn around, you're going to be near the back end of this season and feel like they're right where their win total stands. But it is just a reminder of what we are walking into when this season gets underway. You're going to walk into a year when every time that the Brooklyn Nets to step on the court, it is going to be a massive underdog story. And even when we're watching young players develop and Cam Thomas take over and Jalen Wilson emerge and Noah Clowney, all of these pieces, it's going to be awesome. But you have to keep pushing in the back of your mind that it is about next year's draft class. It's about understanding what you're trying to accomplish, because there are going to be dark times when you go after you take on, let's still say, the Pistons are always a game you feel like you can win because they're the Pistons. When you go and take on the Grizzlies, the Celtics, the Cavs, the Pelicans, the Celtics again, the Knicks back-to-back before you get to Charlotte, yeah, there's just going to be that run where you lose 6-7 straight games, without a doubt. And maybe some of them you'll be closer in than others, but there's also going to be a lot of blowouts on their schedule too. So while we can go through the entirety of this, there's another good note here. I think that Nets Daily actually posted up at some point over on X. This is a reminder. There's no nationally televised games. I think there's one. Every other game is going to be on the Yes Network. That's because this team is not a team that the NBA thinks will be at all interesting to watch. Now, we as fans believe that there's something there to watch, that these young players are going to matter. But on a high level, this is going to be a really difficult start for this team to kick off this season. And you could go through the rest of the schedule, by the way. And again, keep finding yourself pockets where, oh boy, got to take on X, Y, and Z. Oh boy, got to have that West Coast trip. You go all the way out into January, as I just scanned through it here, and get Denver, Utah. Now the Portland Trailblazers are in there, but then the Clippers, the Lakers, OKC, before you come back home, where you'll have the Knicks, the Suns, the Heat, the Kings. It's going to be one of those times where we'll get on these post games a lot and say, hey, this is what we signed up for. We know what the long-term goal is here. So that's just a little tip of the cap when it comes to the schedule. Ultimately, what I also thought about is, in these difficult times, who are going to be the players that can help lead this team? This is not a knock on a player like Dorian Finney-Smith or on a player like Cam Johnson. Cam Johnson was brought in here to be one half of a twin. He was brought in here to be Mikal Bridges, right-hand man, and to also be a guy that knocked down triples. I don't know if I view him, even as a veteran, as being someone who I think would lead. Same thing for Dorian Finney-Smith, because he hasn't been in a vocal leadership type role, because that has not been primarily who he is as a player. When he's on a roster, it's to be supportive of the stars and the leaders. But your backcourt, your point guards, they do need to be leaders. They need to be looked at with the other players in that locker room and believe that I can trust them to put me in good spots to be successful, that I can trust them to maybe tell me some things that I'm not seeing on the court as a veteran. And that's where Dennis Schroder comes in. And I just wanted to paint a little bit of a picture about where maybe Dennis can stick around here beyond this season and even over the next season or two going forward, because you're always going to need a vet. And there's some specific reasons why I think he can be that guy. Let's go ahead and dive into that. And also on the back end, take some of your questions live on YouTube as we wrap up the week with a Friday Night Live special on YouTube. Back at it in just one moment. And before we continue, of course, got to tell you about our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer that you get to first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seats. They also have the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes all the guesswork out of MLB ticketing. You can go ahead. You want Yankees tickets. You want to get some Mets tickets locally. Maybe that key matchup has come to town and you just want to see some of the best players from around the league. You know that Game Time is going to have you covered all the way through. So take that guesswork again out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code Locked On NBA, LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, and as always, they are guaranteed. All right, so as we continue on the Friday night edition, live on YouTube, as I mentioned, really appreciate everybody checking in on the broadcast here tonight. And apologies for what has been a disjointed schedule this particular week. Obviously, dug off a lot of things going on in the background, but wanted to make sure we came in and closed out the week strong with you. Earlier this week, and feel free to go check it out, we had a conversation about Cam Thomas and trying to lay out the map of, hey, could he be a player that can grow into that point guard role? And whether or not you 100% think it's possible, whether or not you think that he's best as a pure shooter, we even saw some things in the comments talking about that he's only a glorified bench scorer and that maybe Nets fans are getting overhyped about what they believe he can grow in. If it's me personally, I obviously think that there's a path for it. And at a minimum, there's a justification for trying it. Because again, in a season where the Nets are going to lose a lot of games, you do not want to look back at game 72, game 75, game 82 and say, oh, I wish we had done more. And that's not just about Cam Thomas. It's about Jalen Wilson as well. And we're going to have conversations this upcoming week, Doug and I, as he returns back to the podcast about, hey, what will it take for Jalen Wilson to become the starter on this roster if Cam Johnson is going to be here long term? What will it look like for Noah Clowney to be a success in the first 20 to 30 games this season, in spite of wins or losses? What can he do on the court to improve himself? And one of those things, and this may extend to some of those other veterans, that I believe is important is having those voices in the locker room. Dennis Schroder played phenomenally over for the Olympics for Team Germany. He comes back into this fold here, and it's just the type of player that I think does get overlooked when we talk about the value that he could have. One of the things that sparked it was I saw an old replay of the Kevin Garnett era of the Brooklyn Nets, and Joe Johnson was there knocking down some outside hoops. And Joe Johnson, at least for me, holds like a very fun place in my Nets history mind. He's not somebody that was brought in to be the best player in that version of the team, but he was a consummate professional. He gave you some highlight moments, and he ends up being a little bit, I think, more elevated for fans in the history of the Nets than probably ultimately the stats, the tenure, or the success or failures of that version of the team really warrant. Dennis Schroder, in that way, can be the player, I think, on a team that's going to lose a ton of basketball games, that when we look back maybe 2 or 3 years from now, if they end up bringing him back and keeping him around, that we'll say, yeah, he's the guy that night over night, you always knew what you were going to get from him. We saw this last season already. This guy doesn't take off possessions, doesn't really take off plays. He has some lulls. He goes through bad shooting runs for sure. But you never have to wonder about his dedication or his drive or what he's hoping to do when he gets on the court every night. And he's been vocal about it, saying that he wants to stay in Brooklyn long term. Now, whether or not that's just saying the right things because you should, whether or not he wants to try to set up for another opportunity at 31, maybe becoming a free agent and seeing what the market looks like, I also think that seeing what the market looks like is a factor in this. We mentioned also when we were talking about backcourts, a guy like Tyus Jones, who ended up kind of, getting lost out there in the NBA free agency veteran landscape. It was not pretty where he had to end up and what he ultimately took from a contract standpoint. If you're Dennis Schroder and all things are being equal, maybe the money could be a little bit better if you do it ahead of time. But also, maybe the money becomes a little bit relative if you just want to not have to bounce around for another season. And in terms of these two type of players, as we've referenced craftednba.com before, when you go in and look at offensive load, taking into account assists, creation, field goal attempts, free throw attempts, box creation for other players, and also turnovers, yeah, Tyus Jones, he's obviously been a solid player when you look at the fact that he's in the 90th percentile in creation. Dennis Schroder is in the 88th percentile. Dennis Schroder is in the 94th percentile in passer rating. That is where Tyus Jones is absolutely elite in that 99th percentile. But all of these things are interesting to take into account and think about a backcourt for the Brooklyn Nets that just doesn't have a lot of bodies. Even if I say that Cam Thomas is going to be used as a point guard more, there's nothing I'd rather have than a guy like Dennis Schroder slowly and eventually being the player that's coming off the bench for this team to be able to support a player like Cam Thomas, to be able to tell him, hey, these are things that I'm seeing out there. And we've talked about the Kevin Durant, the Kyrie Irving era, obviously being around amazing players like that. If you are a young talent like Cam Thomas matters, you need to soak all that in like a sponge. But one of the things that we've also mentioned consistently year over year on this podcast is when it comes to role players, when it comes to veteran guys who are just about the grind, that can be informative for a young player that maybe is about to crack that stardom kind of era of his career, right? First round pick, already showing you how good he can be with the ball in his hands, but now we want to expand that thing. It doesn't hurt if you can point to a vet who's going to tell you, listen, like, I'm not going to be that superstar. I never was considered to be in line to become that superstar. But these are all the little things that I did to get there, to get to the highest possible maximized value that I had. And oh, by the way, it's not like Dennis Schroder doesn't have playoff experience, NBA playoff experience, international Olympic experience. Like, he has a lot that he can lean on. And it doesn't just have to be about Cam Thomas. It can be about Keon Johnson, another former first round pick who maybe is going to get a chance here to showcase something. Then when you expand it out to the rest of the Brooklyn Nets and those veterans, you just don't, at least in my opinion, have the same type of vibe. I can look at a player like Dorian Finney-Smith and say there's probably some really good things there for a guy like Noah Clowney to take away, especially from a defensive perspective. But again, not the same level of athleticism that Noah Clowney brings. It's the different mold of player. I don't know. Not that there wouldn't be valuable. And then Cam Johnson. I just don't think that Cam Johnson is the guy, even though he's right there ahead of Jalen Wilson. We all kind of have this sense within the Nets fan base that when it comes to pass, that Cam Johnson ultimately gets moved. Maybe it's this year, maybe it's at the deadline, maybe it's before the season, whenever it is. But Jalen Wilson is already kind of right there ready to do it. And that may be because we got exposed a year ago to a player in Cam Johnson that we thought, oh, this guy is going to be a knockdown three-point shooter, which he is, but he's also going to be this really versatile defensive weapon. I thought that offensively, he would expand that game a little bit, start to showcase a little more with the ball in his hands, taking guys off the dribble. They didn't have that. So in terms of what you're going to be, if you're Jalen Wilson, hey, you know what you are, and you know the areas to work on. You can always learn from these veterans. But I just think that Dennis Schroder is in a unique spot to be the guy that holds on here because you don't have these other clear talents in the backcourt beyond Cam Thomas that are pushing and are ready, right? Jalen Wilson's ready to start making some impact here. Noah Clowney is ready to make that impact. Nicholas Claxton's already making that impact. So they don't still have this runway maybe building up to it where we don't know who's going to be in the backcourt for the Brooklyn Nets over the years to come. And by the way, coming up here in one moment, there's also a reason why it makes sense in the short and long term to maybe keep a player like Schroder around when we project forward to what we hope is a very quote unquote successful season, as in not winning a lot of basketball games and getting the first overall lottery pick. And right now, as it stands, drafting Cooper Flagg. We'll talk about what the projections look like potentially and why a player like Schroder can be valuable to this team as well to close out our Friday night episode in just one moment. Oh, but before we do that, we got to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. You know, we said it before. I love sports. You love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. And frankly, that is why, even though we've seen a lot of sports going to the offseason, we have NFL ramping up right now. We have MLB that's been in full effect. We obviously know that a place like FanDuel is going to be hooking up all customers with not only a boost, also a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You get over to FanDuel right now. Listen, this is the time of year, man. NFL is in second week of their preseason action. That means that you get in the mix now. You can still get those odds over-unders on a team like the Giants. Listen, the win total doesn't look great. So maybe you try to spike those opportunities and get on the mix before the season kicks off. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, as we tie a pretty little bow onto our Friday night Locked On Nets episode, we remind you, as always, get over to YouTube, get over to the podcast feeds, support any way you want, and get into the comments. As I know, I can see literally dozens upon dozens of comments piling up in the background as we run live on a Friday night. The other factor as to why having a guy like Schroder around is great. And I think why he could be here long term. Price, probably not going to be that expensive. Now, the interesting thing will be, how does he play early in the year, and do playoff teams come calling for his services? Will the Brooklyn Nets find a deal that they think is worth it? That's certainly possible, right? You have to take that into account. But if I'm looking at Dennis Schroder right now, and then I'm also projecting forward to the upcoming draft class, listen, we can all sit here and say Cooper Flag, Nets are going to get number 1 overall pick. We're all good. Great. 18 and a half years old, 6'9", 205, right? Playing in the front court. That's fantastic. Okay, even if they don't get that in the 2nd overall pick. Right now, is it Ace Bailey? Okay. Another front court player. Now, when you get to Dylan Harper, this is again where I still think that there's the unique value. Because when you get to Dylan Harper and you say, awesome, he's going to come in the door. It's just like when I talk about it with Cam Thomas. You want to bring him in the door and decide about whether or not he's going to be the point guard, off ball 2, backcourt, 6'6", 220. This is the kind of size that you can get excited about in your backcourt. Still need to have a veteran there. And that isn't to say that we can't go to the market and find any number of veterans available to put into the backcourt. Of course. But having someone that has already lived around for not only a little bit of the season last year, but then a full season this year, so many young players like Noah Clowney, like Jalen Wilson, like Cam Thomas, like Keon Johnson, to have lived around all of them, Nick Claxton, and to understand the best way maybe to utilize them, the best way to work them into the offensive fold, that has value. If slowly Dennis Schroder becomes a guy that finds himself on the bench more often than he finds himself in the game, that's okay. Because it looks like you have a player coming in with the mentality of, I want to be a part of this rebuild. I want to be one of the stewards of this new young generation of Brooklyn Nets basketball. And I understand what my value and role is here. And it's not just that I can go into a game and certainly catch a heater, put up some buckets, right? It needs to also be that I can help these guys in between games, off the court, on the practice sessions as well. And by the way, it's not a knock in any previous era of the Brooklyn Nets. It's just that there's been so many different iterations of what this team looked like, what it's supposed to be, what it's going to be going forward. There was such a revolving door. I mean, we know that Ben Simmons was on paper, one of the best, possible talents the Nets could have especially after you lose all of your superstars. But he hasn't been there. He hasn't been capable of doing that. Ultimately, talent wins out. So if he ends up being healthy and he can play and he can contribute, fantastic. But the Brooklyn Nets aren't bringing him back. They're winding down the clock on getting off of his contract and getting him out the door. So who do you want to keep around? Who are the voices that you want your young players listening to? Ideally, it's the ones that you know will be here for at least a couple more seasons. Get into the comments about this, by the way, too, because I really do look back now when you think about Dennis Schroder's career and the stats that he's put up and the number of teams that he's played on. It has been just such an interesting revolving door for him. Obviously, last year plays on both the Raptors and the Nets. The year prior, he plays for the Lakers. The year prior, he plays for the Celtics and for the Rockets. Going back to 2021, yeah, he's back on the Lakers again. I mean, we're doing reverse order here. Also played for the Thunder for 2 years. His career started with the Hawks and had a heck of a long run there, where he played, by the way, his rookie season coming in 49 games. After that, he goes ahead and gives you 77, 80, 79, and then plays in 67 in his final season. The minutes build up 13, 19, 20, 31, 31. And all of a sudden, you start to get a player, by the way, which is just as big a factor, that you can rely on to be able to play. Some small injuries here and there, certainly. But last year, combined across 2 rosters, he gave you 80 games. With the Lakers, it was 66. Playing across 2 teams the year prior in the Rockets and the Celtics, he still gave you over 60-plus games. Only 61 in the Lakers in 2020, 2021. But consistency matters. He's played 767 career games, averages 27 minutes a night, and gives you 14 points for his career. There's not a lot of guys right now on the Brooklyn Nets roster that can say that they're capable of doing that. Or should I correct myself, that have shown that they are capable of doing that and can do that consistently game over game. Right now, when you walk in the door, it's Cam Thomas and then it's Schroder. He's the next highest points per game coming out of last season for the Brooklyn Nets. Cam Johnson's right behind him there. Spencer Dinwiddie is there. He's gone. Nicholas Claxton is there. You hope it grows. Lonnie Walker, gone. Dorian Finney-Smith, likely gone. Royce O'Neal, gone. I'm giving you the guys, right? And there's going to be other players that fill into those roles. Noah Clowney is obviously going to become more than a 6-point per night scorer in the upcoming season. But just the reality of the consistency that Dennis Schroder can offer for a roster, I think matters in a big way. And also, as the reminder, when we think about the number of assists last season, Schroder ended up leading the team, tied with departed Spencer Dinwiddie at 6 per game. Ben Simmons, in his very limited action, at 5.7. Mikal Bridges gone, 3.6. Dennis Smith Jr. gone, 3.6. Cam Thomas expanding his game, 2.9. I think that's going to be closer to 5 than it's going to be to 3 this upcoming year. But then Royce O'Neal also gone, right? So all of your key contributors and some of the key categories that Dennis can fill the gaps of are a part of the departed players that are no longer with this team. Something to think about as we work our way through August towards obviously September. And then we finally get into the camp mix early in October. And then we get to real games. And we'll start to just see what all these young players are capable of doing. But I think sometimes when we talk about rebuilding and we talk about tearing everything down and maximizing value of veterans, you do want to equate what their value can be beyond whether or not they're in the way of young player XYZ. And Doug and I had this conversation when we did our 240 breakdown. I may be over eager in how many minutes I'm giving to certain young players right out the gate, or in who I have in the starting lineup when I put Noah Clowney in there over Dorian Finney-Smith, if we assume the roster exists as it is. But there's going to be a changing of the guard at some point. We're not going to have this roster going into the season as constituted, if that were to be the case, and find ourselves 25 games in, and we look down and we see that Dorian Finney-Smith, Dennis Schroder, and Cam Johnson are all in the starting lineup. That would seem impossible to me right now. But it doesn't mean that they don't have value, even if they're there on the bench helping out the young talent. That being the case, we'll be back in next week, Doug Norrie and myself, talking about how do certain players take that next jump going into the upcoming season. Maybe we'll take a look at some speculative trade rumors that are still slowly buzzing around out there. Does it seem more or less likely now that more deals happen before the year kicks off? All that'll be coming up. And then we will start to mix in here at some point. Want to get some voices on that'll tell us what to watch for. As I always get choked up talking about the NBA draft. What to watch for when we think about guys like Cooper Flagg and Harper, and whether or not there's a growth checkpoint here that we can look for if we're keeping our eye on the college game throughout the year. What can these kids show to cement or elevate where they fall in the hierarchy of the draft board? We're doing all that as we continue to roll through the summer. But until next time, as always, when there is no Doug Norrie, there is no quote short of saying that I miss my friend. And I can't wait until he's back so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. Coming back with you live on YouTube for a chat in just one moment. We will see you next time. Basketball, 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 yeah. All right, friends, let's have a conversation for a little bit. As I said, I think we did this on Tuesday, talking about Cam Thomas. Man, we got plenty of people in the mix here, including when I came in to start the live, there was already a conversation that was in the middle of it all happening here with a lot of familiar faces as well. I'll take a look through, see if there's anything out there that we want to dive in on. Obviously, if you had something thought earlier in the episode, throw at Locked On Nets up and I'll go ahead and bring it up on the screen. Otherwise, I'll just go ahead and put up this one first and foremost, because that's all you ever want to see is someone thanking me for just putting in the work, right? Awesome podcast. I appreciate that, Gerard. You've been a frequent flyer, and you're coming in all the way from New Zealand, and I can probably not do the math on that organically. What time is it in New Zealand right now? New Zealand time. Oh, it's 12 p.m. Oh, you woke up with me practically. Fantastic. I'm glad that you were here for it and got to be in on the action. Anybody else? Here we go. John, he threw up the Locked On. Jonathan, don't want to cut you short. Looking at Cooper Flagg or Ace Bailey, who do you think makes Brooklyn front court stronger and could complement Claxton and Clowney, plus help activate Cam's weaknesses? Yeah, this is going to be the next phase for us. There's no reason for me to mince any words about the fact that I have not gone and watched enough of either of their tape to say that this player is the better piece to complement any one of those guys. The upside of this is, hey, we just want really good players. So at a certain point, this would probably be what Doug would say, give me the best players that I can get, and we'll sort out how they fit together, right? The idea of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden, how are they going to do it with one basketball? Don't really care. They'll all figure it out. They'll all get theirs, and it'll be really incredible offensive basketball to watch. So I think a little bit that will inform any fit that you want to watch is how does Nicholas Claxton and Noah Clowney play and grow together this season? That actually is going to be something to watch for. And then you can watch whether it's Cam Johnson, whether it's Jalen Wilson, who's the other player? Maybe it's Trendon Watford at times. Who's the other player? Ben Simmons is going to see his minutes. That when you watch them on the court, what are the traits that they have that help Nicholas Claxton, that help Noah Clowney be the best version of themselves? That's going to be fun to watch. The nice thing here is, too, in Claxton, clearly established. Noah Clowney, I believe, will see more of it this year. Their defensive value and versatility in different ways is what makes you want to look at that front court and say, man, just give me another absolute killer on the offensive end, because I have these guys that can handle a lot of that work at the other end of the court. So we will do a lot of that, though. I'll throw up another one here from you, John, just because you mentioned Zaire Williams could have the most upside out of the failed draft picks to grow more offensively, considering he's got the height and defensive potential. In theory, yes. Maybe we'll actually, this is another good episode. I'll make a note about it here, Jonathan. Thank you so much. Who has the best chance to succeed here out of these, reclamation projects? I know nobody wants to hear it, but I'm so fascinated. It's just an Exhibit 10 contract. I'm so fascinated about what happens with Killian Hayes, just in general. Is there anything left in his career with the Brooklyn Nets or otherwise? Is there anything left here? I don't know. It's going to be a fascinating watch. Same thing with Zaire Williams. Like, okay, you have defensive potential, but how much do we need that? As much as we need more offensive potential. That's what we want to mix in here. Because the one thing when you talk about Nicholas Claxton, or you talk about, specifically Nicholas Claxton or Day'Ron Sharpe as an example, or what we've seen when Ben Simmons has played is, it's the lack of fully fleshed out offensive game with consistency, or even just free throw shooting, that holds these guys back from maybe having more value, from being able to get on the court more, from being able to be more flexible, to be able to be paired up with different combinations and still be successful. It's hard. It's hard when you have that. 10 a.m. here. Ian, oh, you're in Melbourne. Okay, there you go. See, noon in New Zealand, 10 a.m. there. That means you've been up with me since 9. Lovely. Looks like you have a fantastic family there. Happy to have you on here with us. Absolutely. It's such a good way to get yourself up here. Absolutely awesome podcast, Adam. Yeah, come on. Stop it. Stop it. Stop complimenting me, but please don't stop complimenting me. No. There's so much that we're gonna unfold and unpack as we get into this season. And that's why I do think the side-by-side, something we've never had to do in years past, because the Brooklyn Nets have never had any picks really, is keep an eye on. And because when it was a superstar era, it didn't matter. Even if you had picks, it's a later pick in the first round. Even if it's a talent like Cam Thomas, okay, fine. But when is he going to get in the mix? We know it should have been sooner, but it doesn't have the same impact. Now we're talking about a team with multiple first-round picks next year, walking in the door and saying, when we watch games this year for the Brooklyn Nets, we'll be able to watch games at the college level and say, oh, okay, this piece here, this player coming into this mix, that can equal something for us as we work our way forward. Excuse me. I'm probably going to wrap it up here, mostly because something, dust or otherwise, has gotten into me and is causing me to have a little bit of a hard time keeping my voice clean here. Patty Mills, always love a Patty Mills shout out. Would have been great for the team this year. Yes and no. I'm going to disagree. I'm going to disagree with you on him. Not that I have anything against Patty Mills. I just don't, he's not that player in terms of backcourt player, like a Dennis Schroder, on ball, creator, facilitator. That's not Patty Mills as much, right? So I want the guy that can have that ball in his hands. Now, if you're just talking about veteran and being a voice in the locker room, sure, definitely something that you could put in there. But that is going to be a different type of player mold for me. I'll also tell Ian that when you said a quick trip down, I just meant down to the bottom of the standings. With the way this season is going to unfold, as we talked about the schedule, I think we're going to look back pretty quick, 20 to 25 games in, and we'll be saying, oh, here we are. That didn't take long, right? It didn't take long to be sitting there and saying we're a 3-7 team. Oh, we're a 3-13 team. We're a 5-19 team. Like, I think it's going to feel like one of those Detroit Piston-esque kind of seasons in terms of record and knowing right where you stand right out of the gate. I think it's going to feel starkly different, when we talk about the talent that we think we're developing here. So, you know what? That's a good call. Shame on me. When you put up little notes like that, you might want to clue people in case it's something specific, but no problem at all. Last one from Jonathan, who came in here for the third time. I mean, listen, you bring it up, you bring it up. What's the best way for Brooklyn to raise Ben Simmons' 0% trade value this season without costing the young guys valuable minutes? I don't think that there is a real trade value for him, no matter what they do. Um, I think that this is my personal opinion, and Doug and I, he's went a little bit higher, but we said maybe split the difference. It's something like 18 minutes a night. I just don't see a reason to play him any more than you need to. I don't think you sacrifice the young players. 18 minutes, you need a guy in the rotation. I don't want to see Trendon Watford get stunted again and be playing 10 or 12 minutes a night. I think that number needs to be bigger. I don't know. I just do not think that even if he's playing well in those 18 minutes, a team will look at him and the defensive value. Sure, the contract, even if the Nets are taking some of that money, it's still going to mean equaling. Got to add up the contract somehow, sending players in and out. Right now I cannot see it. Doesn't mean that something can't shift, but this just feels so much like the Nets and everyone else in the league is just letting it. This contract's going to play itself out, and then we'll go from there. I'll get a couple more in here just because I see some new ones. Dwayne, what do you think about the talk that Trae Young is the best point guard for Claxton to play with? Do you think we should pursue him even in the rebuild since he can be a key piece in the new era? No, I'm not as high on Trae Young as some other people are. He's not that, age wise, it's not like he's so far, out there in terms of it that you would sit and say he can't be a long-term piece for any team, let alone the Brooklyn Nets. I get the fit and the value that he would bring for someone like Nicholas Claxton, but I just think you got to find that guy who's coming in, right? He's 26 years old. He'll be 27, if it's next year, a year later from now, or maybe the trade conversations start to come up this season. And this, while I'm trying to think about it, like we talk about Donovan Mitchell last year and the trade rumors and things like that, while I don't think that this team, within reason, could add a really strong piece and change a lot of their overall outlook, you put Trae Young on the team, you'll probably win a couple more games if you're talking about making any kind of move this season. If the Atlanta Falcons, whatever, the Atlanta Hawks, they're all birds. If they decide they want to make a move, like, and really, fully finish stripping this thing down and then rebuilding it up in a different way. I saw one other unique name here from a frog. Thank you guys for the content. I always listen to you guys when I'm at work. Well, thank you. And honestly, nobody supports you not paying attention or getting your work done at work and listening to us more than us. It really warms my heart to know that somewhere out there, data is not being crunched, phone calls are not being answered, and frankly, emails are being completely ignored. I love it. I love to see it. I hope we see more of it. That being the case, we'll go ahead and tie a good bow on it there. Again, whether it's Jonathan, whether it's ERA, who's been coming in here, especially on these lives more, or anyone else, Ian as well. We've seen a lot of you guys around. So when we do one of these lives, we appreciate it. We know when we get back into the regular season, it's going to be more expansive when it comes to the content that we do live and post-game coverage. So we'll start to highlight a lot of that. And again, as I was told over on X recently, like, listen, feel free to take time off. We have greatly reduced our schedule over the month of August, but obviously we'll be ramping it back up as well. So as we enjoy a little bit of a lighter schedule, you enjoy a little bit of a lighter schedule too. But by all means, get over to YouTube, get over to X, get over the podcast feeds, grab the show wherever you can. Back next week with Doug Norrie and probably a ramped up content schedule as well. After all that I just said, we may actually really try to jam in next week a bit more for you to give you that value. So we'll be back again on Monday, talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.